So I'm going to talk really quickly about how to get our work out of Nodebox into other applications so that we can work with them further. Once you think about Nodebox really is just one piece of your pipeline when it comes to doing your data visualization. So your work doesn't necessarily end here. You do work with the data, and then you bring some form of that into Nodebox. You work with it in Nodebox, but then at some point in time, you'll probably, most likely, you'll probably want to get that data out or that visual out of Nodebox and work with it separately in another application that's a little bit more inclined for working, or germane rather, to working with visual things such as graphics, vector graphics, raster graphics. So obviously, no brainer, we should be working with this stuff eventually in Photoshop or Illustrator. So it's pretty simple. Once you get your data and everything into Nodebox and you've worked up maybe a visualization that you want, most of the time you come out of here with some kind of an abstract visualization, or at least the part of it that's tough to do from a computational perspective, right? So what I've done here is I have some Instagram posts that are lined up by like. So I picked a certain tag, and I'm showing here from hot to cold kind of the mass of the most popular post here in red, and then proportionally you can kind of see them all lined up here, right? And you can see my graph over here on the right. So if we want to get this out and work with it in Illustrator or work with it in Photoshop, it's fairly simple to do that. So once you have this all set up, we're going to go to File, and we're going to actually go to Export, and we're given this simple dialog. We have two options. We can export a PDF, or we can export a PNG. PDF is what you'll want to export when it comes to, let's see here, RCTID is the tag, and we'll call it RCTID vectors. And what that is this will be ideal if you want to import this into Illustrator and work on this as vector graphics. If on the other hand you want to maybe export this out to a PNG, which may actually work really well on your Tumblr or any other sort of application, or if you want to work on it in Photoshop, which is something maybe you're a little bit more comfortable doing, then you're actually going to select PNG as your export format. You're going to press Next, and you're going to say, let's see, let me name the file, RCTID raster. This will export a raster for us with a transparent background. RCTID raster. Alright, so we should have ended up with, I'm in Photoshop now, so let me open up Photoshop and give it a second here. I'm going to open, and this is where I can go and I can find my PNG, right? So I'm going to find this really quickly. And okay, so inside of here I should have this raster here, RCTID raster PNG. I'm going to open it up and give it a second here in Photoshop, and it should open up. It's a little slow today, but once it opens up, you'll see that you can work on it like any other raster graphic. One thing you will notice here actually is that it cut the side of the image off. So I'll show you how to work with that here, but you'll notice you do get a full transparency. You get an alpha channel, and it imports as its own single layer. So I can go in here and I can add a title to my graph, or I can add any kind of information to it, right? So I can easily add text in there, and I can put it down here, and I can describe whatever I want. I can give it a solid background, right? So if I want to give it a white background or something of the sort, maybe not full white, shuffle that underneath, you'll see that I'm starting to build up my visual a little bit, right? I could take multiple ones. I can, have them arranged in all different kinds of patterns. So that's how you can work with something in Photoshop. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the fact that this is actually cut off on the right hand side. I'll show that to you in just a second. But what I want to do now is I want to show you, I'm going to open up Adobe Illustrator and show you how the rasters import. So I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to go to Open again, and I should be able to actually add that PDF file in. So if you do recall, we exported a file called rctidvectors.pdf. The nice thing about the PDF format is that it can actually transport Adobe Illustrator vector artwork for us, and which makes it really handy for shuttling things back and forth. So you will notice that this actually is cut off as well. This is what's called the artboard, right? And it's actually cut off that that side of that image that we're working with. Again, I will address that in just a second, how to correct that, but we can actually go over here and we can expand the artboard, I think, to cover it. Okay, so it doesn't look like we actually get that extra coverage, but I think you can actually go in here and work with, yeah, you can go in here and work with the clipping path in Illustrator from the Layers menu. If you're comfortable with Illustrator, then you can go in here to Layers, and you'll notice that every one of these rasters here, every one of these vectors here actually comes out on its own as its own separate path or its own separate object that you can work with. So it's nice because if you like doing vector artwork and you like working with vectors, you can go ahead, and what I usually do is I will actually release this from this clipping group, and then I've kind of got these extra vectors that I can play with here. So I can move this around, move that around. Obviously this messes up your data and its placement, juxtaposition, all that stuff, but just to give you the point that all of these are now separate vectors that you work with. So consider that Nodebox is actually really powerful for drawing vectors and getting them into Illustrator and giving you at least a starting point to work from. So in the past, what I've done is I've actually used Nodebox to draw data vectors, and then what I'll do is I'll actually go in and maybe color them in or tweak them a little bit later, right? So I can go in here and I can double click the color on that and make that a different color, for example blue, right? So just keep that that in mind as in terms of options, and you can add in obviously things like text, right, and the like in any fashion that you're comfortable doing in Illustrator, right? So this is all stuff that you can do inside of Illustrator. So consider this, consider Nodebox just one piece of the workflow, and then consider these kinds of tools like Illustrator and Photoshop to be maybe more on your front end of your design for cleaning it up, making it look better, or maybe just adding a little bit of extra communication or message to what you're trying to do. So that still leaves us with one question to answer, and that is why, when we brought this into Photoshop, was this side cut off? It's pretty simple. If we go to document properties inside of Nodebox, we're going to see that there's a canvas height and a canvas width. Well, simply, we can go in here and we can expand that canvas width, for example, and then we should be able to export this out at the right size. So if you start seeing that problem, just go in here, your document properties, adjust it. It looks like it didn't quite take when I edited that the last time, but you could go in there and you can expand the size of the canvas to get it working properly. Also, you know, you can consider going in here and adding in, for example, divide by 2 to maybe make these numbers smaller. Maybe some of your factors, if you're scaling and it ends up really, you know, disgustingly large, you can always go in here and you can divide and multiply a list of numbers to get, for example, this is the list, oops, this is the first list that I'm working with, right? And then I can always add a divide node and just do a regular mathematical operation to reduce these numbers in half. So, like so. So then I stick that in my pipeline, and it will reduce the size of things. So it's just another way, another technique of getting that on the canvas, so that you can work with it and easily export it into another application like Photoshop or Illustrator. So I hope that helps give you an idea of kind of how you get things out of Nodebox. We've spent a lot of time in Nodebox, but you know, hopefully this answers kind of some of the questions you may have about, okay, now that I have something in Nodebox, what can I do with it? You know, don't consider labeling everything unless you've got some really dynamic labels. Don't consider, you know, consider maybe not labeling everything and adding your titles and stuff like that in Nodebox. That could get a little hairy and difficult. So hopefully this helps and helps you establish a really solid workflow for working with your data visualizations.